On the microphone. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Truckee Donner PUD. It is 6 o'clock, Wednesday, October 18th. Could we get roll call, please?
Yes, thank you. President Bender,
Here.
Vice President Laliotis,
Here.
Director Harris,
Here.
Director Finn,
Here.
Director Guerra.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, roll call. Pledge of Allegiance. Joe, you want to lead us in the pledge? Okay.
I did that part. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hey, thanks, Joe. All right. Brian, any changes?
There are no changes this evening.
Okay, thank you. All right, we are on public comment. Is there any public comment on any matter not on the agenda tonight?
Looking here, there are no public comment.
Got it, thank you. Okay, that takes us to item number 6, Director Update. I'll start from the west.
Always like the picture where the mountains are.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. It's kind of funny that you're all 2 rows back. But I won't make you all get up and move. We'll save that. A few things I'd like to report out this week. I had an opportunity to meet with Mr. Jared Carpenter, our new electric utility director, to learn a little bit more about his experiences and his thoughts, and it was just a really wonderful meeting, and I recommend it to everybody. That my induction cooking experiments are proceeding well, and I didn't burn anything this the Transformation Alliance, this is a good announcement. We met on Friday to listen to our accelerator project pitches, and we had divided into groups that each tackled a different topic with ideas for greenhouse gas reductions in our region. And we heard presentations on biomass, wood is good, networked geothermal pilot project, a buy local carbon offset program, a local food waste reduction program with chickens and composters, and a carbon accounting proposal. We have judges. We do not know who, these were pitches that were, there is award money on the table. The airport district has very generously donated $30,000 to get one of these pitches off the ground. We don't know who the winner is. We are going to be having a public event, which I would like to invite everybody here to, on November 2nd, which is a Thursday, at the Fine Arts Center, where we will get to hear a mini pitch for those of you who aren't at the meeting, and then prizes will be awarded. So I would like to welcome you all to join that and see if we can't get some of these projects off the ground. And I think, the only other thing, I just wanted to mark the Lodi Hydrogen Hub project. We won. We got money. The feds have identified that proposal as one that is worthy of funding, and that is very exciting news for all of us here in Northern California in the clean energy economy. So thank you all very much, and that is my the end of my report out for a director's report. Thanks.
I can't follow all that, can I?
Yeah.
No, Joe's a dog boy, and I have nothing for you. Mr.
Okay,
President. Thank
you got it. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Krista. We're moving east.
I don't have anything tonight. Just thank you to the employees for all their hard work in the last few weeks and everyone's patience driving in town.
Which I did not have, but I still drove slowly tonight. Kim, go ahead.
Tony's taken away my thunder here. I always like to take this opportunity to thank all of the employees, the crews, as well as customer service and administration for all the work that you do, because it does take a village in order to keep our rates good, our water flowing, and our lights on. So I do appreciate it, and yes, patience as we go through the rest of dig season and construction season, and you also want to extend it out for snow season when that eventually comes. But thank you very much.
Cool. Okay, here we are, director update on October 18th. Moves us into some action items. Action item number 7, consideration of the draft electric utility cost of service analysis report and schedule a public hearing on adoption of proposed electric rate increases, time of use rates, and power cost adjustment. And we have Jumbo up there. The Tufts mascot, so I had to, I learned that a couple weeks ago. Go
All
ahead,
right.
Steve.
Good evening, President Bender. Thank you for the mention of the jumbos. I'm happy to be pinch hitting and helping out the Electric Utility and Administrative Department this evening. This is action item 7. So the district's electric retail rates are set by the Board of Directors and adopted by ordinance. The last one was in 2021, and that set electric rates for fiscal year 22 and 23, which increased by 8.5% and 6.5% respectively. The electric rate increases for fiscal year 22 and 23, the last budget, were based on a cost of service analysis, COSA, affectionately known, that was completed prior to the rate setting. Since then, there have been significant changes in energy markets, impacts of the drought, heat domes, gas spikes, supply chain, and a bunch of other factors along with growing customer demand. So in advance of efforts to prepare for the fiscal year 24 and 25 budget, staff anticipated the need for consultant assistance to support the next cost of service justified rates. The board at its March 1st, 2023 meeting approved a contract with HDR Inc., who has done a lot of work with us on the water side. They also have extensive experience on the electric side with public power and with utilities of our size and general characteristics. The purpose of the COSA and rate study is the adoption of cost-based and equitable electric rates that provide adequate funding for operations and maintenance, capital expenditures, and then reserve requirements needs over the long term. So HDR, Sean Korn, is here to present the draft electric cost of service analysis and rate study report. Important highlights of the rate study include rate designs for the next 2 budget years, fixed infrastructure maintenance and operation costs proportionate to rates, evaluation of rate increases applied to the customer charge, and then analyzing rate categories individually and collectively to ensure adequate cost recovery. And again, as a not-for-profit, community-owned public utility, we charge cost of service. So now we'll put it over to Sean for the presentation. And there you go, sir. Thank you.
Good evening, President Bender, directors. Great to be with you all again. It has been a while, so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And this evening, as has been brought up, we're walking through the electric rate study. So just to start out with a high-level overview, our executive summary here, We're looking at our revenue requirement for 2023, approximately $37.5 million. You can see for 24 through 28, that ranges from 39 million up to 46 million. Again, we're focused on the next 2 years, but we did develop a long-range plan, an 8-year plan, and you'll actually see in our rate design bills, you'll rate design comparisons, you'll start seeing we have a 5-year plan out there. That was just for informational purposes based on the analysis we've done here. Our capital expenses over the next 4 years average approximately $11.4 million per year. There's a lot of big projects in there, whether that's a substation, that's annual renewal and replacement needs, right? Replacing the lines or going through that process, as well as other large projects to maintain the infrastructure facilities that you have in place to provide service to your customers. Just as a benchmark, as we start this discussion, you'll see your 2023 rates for residential customers are around 18 cents per kilowatt hour. Our commercial customers are around 19.5 cents per kilowatt hour. As a comparison to other agencies such as Liberty and PG&E, you can see Liberty's at 24, almost 25 cents, and at almost 36 cents for PG&E. So
Sean, those are current rates at
Correct.
this moment in time.
what we see today when we went out and looked at them, correct?
Got it.
Very good question.
Thank you.
Yes. As we started looking at the revenue requirement, and I'll talk a little bit more here in a moment about the process, then we're looking at revenue needs adjustments over the next 5-year period. And you can see in the next 2 years, we've got a plan here of 12%, followed by a 12%, followed by 4, 4, and 3. And so we do have that first initial hit. We have put together some alternatives for the board to consider this evening as you look at the overall financing and funding needs for your operation and maintenance expense, including purchase power, as well as the capital component of that. We also wanted to bring to you all some alternative rate structures to consider, to bring forward. Those include time of use, the TOU, an electric vehicle charging rate, as well as a clean energy rate. So 3 additional rate structure or rate approaches to implement as you go forward. And those, all 3 of those are really more on a pilot approach or basis where we're thinking about here's some options for folks to consider, folks being your customers if the board chooses to move forward with those. So kick this off with our purpose, the overview of the study, the preliminary results and recommendations, and then those next steps. So really, what I want to do this evening is walk you through the overview of that rate setting process. I know you all have been through this, but just a quick refresher, so I'll move through it fairly quickly. And then we'll dive into our 3-step process, our revenue requirement, what is our overall revenue needs, our cost of service, as was mentioned, looking at the equitable distribution of those costs between different customers based on how they utilize the system. So what is their average kilowatt hour use and demands? What is their peak demands in kilowatts? How does that drive the sizing and the purchase of power as you move forward? And then looking for that feedback and direction as we move forward. So you'll see the 3 steps here. That's really what I'll walk through each of these, kind of the basis for each, summarize each of those. Where the 2 kind of decision points are for feedback this evening that we're looking for is on that revenue requirement. So I mentioned already the 12, 12, 4, 4, 3% annual adjustments, or the alternatives we'll walk through. Cost of service, I'll just kind of give you the answer now. It's pretty clean, it's pretty straightforward, so we have no major concerns there. So then it comes down to the rate design, and that's really tied to the overall adjustment that the board is comfortable with bringing forward, and then ultimately looking at those alternatives that we're putting together for time of use, EV, and green rates. So jumping into that revenue requirement or that financial plan, as I mentioned, we looked at an 8-year period. We want to look out over the long term. So we looked at 2024 through 2031. We have our projected rate revenues based on the current rate, so what you have adopted today, plus our current customer characteristics. So number of customers, amount of kilowatt hours, amount of demand, our KW that we charge, and those current rate schedules that we have. Our expenses are based on our fiscal year 23 and 24 budget. So 23 adopted, 24 preliminary. You're talking about that more after me. So that can play into this a little bit as well. And then looking at our capital funding, how we're paying for all those capital projects and how those are being funded over time. And then as part of that, we want to think about how are we prudently maintaining the financial metrics of the district. So looking at making sure we have adequate debt service coverage ratios if we're going to issue long-term debt, maintaining adequate reserves. We'll talk about that here in a moment, as well as maintaining that renewal and replacement funding. So here's our summary of our revenue requirement. Lots of pretty colors up there. Going across the chart is our years. So from fiscal year 23, our current budget year, fiscal year 24, preliminary budget, and then projected out over through 2031. The blue bar at the bottom, or the first bar, that is our overall O&M expense. So O&M expenses here, you can see these increase over time. Right now, we have an inflationary assumption of approximately 3% per year on our ongoing O&M expenses. The red, this middle bar here, which is basically just under that black dashed line, that's our annual purchase power expenses. That's increasing at approximately projected 4% per year right now. So combined, we're running at about 3.5% per year annual inflationary increases. The purplish bar here, you'll see kind of highlighted here above that line, that is our rate-funded capital. So what we're trying to accomplish here is there's a portion of ongoing rate revenues that we're turning right back into the system to fund capital improvements. So a lot of times what we'll talk about is, you know, the annual renewal and replacement needs. How are we paying for the ongoing capital improvements that happen regardless of system changes, right? No new customers, we just need to reinvest because we have infrastructure out there that is losing its useful life, it's not working anymore, and needs to be replaced as part of that. The remainder of that capital plan over the course of this time period is being funded with existing reserves as we go forward. So that's the balance that we're looking at. And then you'll see the orange bar at the top. That is our reserve funding. So part of that is putting funds back into reserves to be used the following year to pay for capital improvement projects or to meet our minimum reserve fund targets as we go through that. The black dashed line, that is our current revenue. So if we don't assume any new rate adjustments, that is the revenue that we would generate in each of these years. It's got that slight tip up into it. That's based on customer growth. That's the only change we've built into that, but that's fairly minimal as we go out over time. So in order to get that black dashed line to run nice and smooth right across the tops of each of those bars, that's where we're looking at the 12% annual adjustment in fiscal year 24 and 25, and then followed by 4% and then our 3% annually as part of that. Now, one of those key elements that we look at is our minimum target reserves. And again, these are our minimums, right? These are the floor levels that we want to be at as we go forward. That's the black dashed line again going across the middle of the screen there. Now, you have several different types of annual reserves that we look at. One is the operating reserve. That is our blue back down here at the bottom. That is based on 180 days of O&M less purchase power. So it's really looking at your ongoing operation and maintenance expense, your staffing, your materials and supplies, things of that nature. The the grayish black bar here, right above that, that is our rate reserve. That's based on 180 days of our purchase power. So those two make up the majority of your minimums, and it's based on maintaining that 180 days of your annual O&M expenses, both operation and maintenance and purchase power. The red is our capital replacement, and then there's a blue in here, which is our unfunded liability and our facility fee fund. What you can see in this chart is that our operating and purchase power, our rate reserve, are continually kind of increasing over time, right? They're meeting that 180 days as we go forward until we get out there until 2027 timeframe. The red is our capital. That's what we're buying down each year, right? You can see that starts at, up there at the 25 million, it's about a $10 million band. That shrinks down to a couple million, and then we start growing that again. That's part of the orange that we had on the prior slide that we're put into reserve to pay for projects. So overall, we have this dip, right? I call it the pinch point. Some of you old timers here, you remember my smiley face chart, right? I got to change it up every now and then. So this is our pinch point here in fiscal year 25. And that's where we're looking at those necessary adjustments in the initial years to get us up above our minimum reserves or maintain those minimum reserves. And then as we go out over time, it's really looking, I'll call it more inflationary, 3-4%. We like to be in that 3% range for historical inflationary levels. But that is the key driver as we start looking at this is how do we right the ship is how I'll frame it. And as we start looking at different rate adjustments in those initial years, that starts changing that curve, how fast that comes down each year, and then how much do we have to adjust rates in the long term to get that back up and meet our minimum targets. So in order to do that, we put together a couple of alternatives for you all. So that original is our 12-12-4-4. You see we pulled this out to 2031. Really, once you get past 2027, so starting the last 4 years there, we're just assumed inflationary at 3%. The other way to get there, instead of the 12-12-4-4, would be a 10.5, 10.5, 5, and a 5. Or a 9.5, 9.5, 9.5, and then we get to our inflationary, or we hit it right away, we do a 15%, and then we've got a couple fives and we're back to inflation. Again, the out years are really based on our inflation assumptions, 4% annual increase in purchase power, roughly 3% annual inflationary on our O&M expenses as part of that, and fairly constant demand and purchase power components of that. If we look at that compared to our slide, you can see that that shifts some of these out. So we do, under the green, which is our 9.5, 9.5, 9.5, as well as the first 10.5, 10.5, we go below our minimum target. So that's where we came back with that 12% in the first 2 years to stay above our minimum target here. And the purple is the one-time adjustment of 15% followed by the 2 5s. So again, trying to maintain that over time. As we get out to 27, 28, those are those inflationary level adjustments. Again, that would be, you would all have that information in front of you as we get out to that point, thinking about a 2-year rate setting period where you could make those adjustments as you start looking at where these lines are ending as you get out over this first 2-year period as part of that. What does that look like from just an across-the-board rate adjustment? This slide has each of those options there. Once we get out to about 2027, it's about an $8 difference for a typical residential customer using 800 kilowatt hours. So that kind of stays constant as we get past that. Once we get to those inflationary levels, we stay at about that $8 a month change. You can see in the early years, really in fiscal year 24 and 25, that's where you start seeing the difference between the different alternatives, right? Under our original, we jump up to $160. That's this blue bar. That's at the 12%. If we look at the 15%, we jump to $165 essentially in that first year. And then things start averaging and leveling out as we go over time. What's interesting in all of this is if you look at that alternative 3, which is this purple bar, we jump up the highest initially, and then it stays the lowest out over time. That's that compounding effect we get from an upfront larger increase, and then we can smooth that out over time. So just one advantage of that, the disadvantage may be to the board, what that overall level of adjustment is in that first year as part of that, versus our smooth approach of, the original or option 1 or option 2. So as we look at our overall revenue requirement, looking at funding our annual O&M, including purchase power, as well as our capital improvement plan, then there are annual adjustments needed to maintain that, as well as meet our financial metrics, such as our minimum reserve levels. And then our proposed transition plan will meet that over time to provide a financially healthy and sustainable utility for the long term as we start looking at this over the next couple of years. That's our revenue requirement. The next step is looking at our cost of service. So one thing to mention here as we start thinking about our cost of service and our rate design, everything I have in here is based on the 12-12-4-4-3. If the board chose a different approach, one of the other alternatives that we put together, that would change these numbers, but these are kind of that original assumption that we built into the analysis. It would not change things significantly, but as you saw from those bill comparisons, it does have somewhat of an impact on that first and second year customer bill going forward. That shouldn't change our cost of service significantly, just because there's not a significant difference in those overall revenue adjustments, but these next two pieces are based on that revenue requirement. So if you all want something different from those alternatives, we just have to rerun this for the next step, which is not a problem. So our cost of service, what is that? Well, it's our method to equitably allocate the revenue requirement to the different customer classes of service. So when we think about your customer classes of service, we know that there's differences in how you serve them. We have our primary residential, we have our secondary residential, and then we have our small, medium, and large commercial customers. And those categories are really in place to reflect how they use the system and the demands and characteristics that they require from an infrastructure standpoint to provide them service. So when we look at a cost of service, that's what we're looking at is what are the costs to provide them service based on how they use the system. So overall average kilowatt hours, overall peak demand, and how they're driving the system costs that we have. We do this because it's our method of maintaining equitable rates between different customers. And then this avoids subsidies, right? If we start seeing that one class is paying too much and another is not paying enough, we're able to adjust the rates so that we're able to reflect our equitable allocation of costs so that we recover the appropriate revenue from each class of service. So remember on the water side, we have that down to the penny, right, when we go through our cost of service. On the electric side, not that exact, but we still want to have cost-based and equitable rates as we go through this. So I've mentioned our customers, our permanent residential and our non-permanent residential. Really on the commercial side, it's based on their demand. So when we look at our small commercial, it's less than 50 kW demand, kilowatt demand. Medium is 50 to 200, and then over 200 is our large customers. As we looked at the cost of service, there were no significant impacts on the cost of service, which what that means is that in general and on average, each class is paying their proportional equitable share of the costs based on their current revenues and the costs that we allocated to them through the cost of service. So given that, we would recommend at this point that we adjust rates across the board. So that means if we're looking at a 12% adjustment in year one, all rate components for all customer classes would go up 12%. And so that's how we've designed the proposed rates for your current rate schedules is to meet that overall 12% adjustment. So as we go into that rate design, again, I mentioned we have 5 years here. This was just for illustrative purposes. We're really looking at the rates for fiscal years 24 and 25. Again, that's that 12% adjustment. So our permanent residential customers, we have a monthly customer charge today of $24.53 and an energy or kilowatt hour charge of 14.9 cents. Going forward, adjusted by our 12%, that customer charge would go up to $27.47 and 16.6 cents. So again, just taking our current rates, increasing them by the overall system percentage needs. Non-permanent, similar approach. We have our same customer charge, the $24.53 to $27.47 and $30.77. And then our energy charge is different for our non-permanent resident customers. Goes from 16.9 cents to 18.9 to 21.2 cents. So again, just that overall system increase based on our necessary revenue adjustments. So what does that look like? How do you compare to others? So as we look at this chart here, this is based on a customer that uses 800 kilowatt hours. So here's our current rate, $143.73. Here's our year one proposed rate, that'd be $160.62. And then we looked at Roseville, Lodi, Pluma, Sierra Rural, Liberty, and PG&E. And you can see this black line here is kind of the average. Liberty and PG&E kind of pull that up a little bit, as you can see there for that system average overall. Didn't mean to do that, sorry. But as we compare to others, again, this is, as President Bender asked before, this is, as of today, what these agencies' rates are. So they also may be going through a similar process. They may be adjusting their rates as part of this, so that would obviously change their rates as they go forward as well. Commercial side, our 3 commercial customers, same approach. We've got for our small commercial, we have a customer charge and an energy charge, very similar to our residential rate. We have a different customer charge and energy charge for them. Again, those are increased by the overall system revenue adjustment need. For medium and large customers, we have a customer charge, an energy charge, and a demand charge. So that demand charge reflects a lot of that infrastructure need that's necessary to serve them when they use power and are required to have those facilities in place to meet those needs. So for those customers, again, still an across-the-board adjustment. As we look at those, we're increasing it by the overall percentage adjustment for all 3 of those different charges that we have in place. How does that compare? Looking at a commercial customer with 1,600 kilowatt hours, very similar comparison. You can see here Roseville, Lodi, a little bit on the lower end as compared to where you are today in our proposed year 1 adjustment. Pluma, Sierra, Liberty, and PG&E really more on that higher end, more comparable to you all as part of that. Again, this is for small general, so our small commercial customer class can vary depending on the type of customer, whether it's a medium, large customer, and it also can vary for the different agencies on how they define their small, medium, or large, right? What we have is less than 50, 50 to 200, and over 200. That's not a universal necessarily approach. Some have other slight variances to that approach. So that's I'll call our status quo, going through looking at the overall revenue needs of the electric utility, cost of service, which is really looking pretty clean across the board adjustment, and then adjusting the current rates by those overall percentage adjustments that we've outlined in the costs, in the revenue requirement. As I mentioned at the beginning, we'll also talk a little bit about some alternative rate design alternatives and approaches for your consideration. Just some kind of upfront discussion. You know, each of these alternatives require some changes to some processes that you have here internally to make sure that we can bill for them, make sure we can capture that data and information that can go along with that. But ultimately, if the board chose to move forward with this, they would be available in 2024 for customers. So as we look at that, we've got our 4 components here. Actually, I mentioned 3 at the beginning. Our pilot time of use rate for residential customers, our pilot electric vehicle rate for those commercial customers, and then our clean energy rate for all customers. The one I didn't mention at the beginning is a power cost adjustment, or a PCA. If you're not familiar with that term, what that is a charge that is put into place on a kilowatt hour basis generally to recover changes above and beyond how you incur purchase power costs or reductions in purchase power costs. So a PCA can be implemented to account for changes in your power, unforeseen changes in our power costs. So as I mentioned, we have 4% a year in our current projection. If it were 6% next year, you could implement a power cost adjustment. It would be an adder to your current bill. You would take all your costs essentially for purchase power divided by all the kilowatt hours sold, and it adds a penny, just as an example, to everybody's bill to recover the cost of that increased power. So generally a backwards looking approach. Some folks look forward. I'm not so sure I'm comfortable with that. I like the backwards looking approach, and you have some reserves in place to account for that short term, whereas as you implement this, you'd be able to look at that. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. So our pilot time of use rates for residential. So we went back, worked with staff, pulled a whole lot of data and information on all your customers, and we looked at the timing of what that peak use is for your residential customers. And when would we implement a time of use rate? And if you look at different time of use rates, there's different hours of the day that people charge a different rate for to reflect how you've incurred cost, encourage efficiency, change behavior. There's a lot of different reasons that we think of our time of use rates. In your case, we looked at a 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. window, which was when we had some peaks in our overall cost, as well as a time where, when we think about it, when we're looking at all of our power supply, we're kind of off that solar green power side of it. So we're starting to get into our other power resources that wouldn't reflect that. I'll call it green, even though we're calling a green rate later on. So when we looked at that, we looked at the 4 to 9 p.m. period. That would be our peak. And then we said everything else was off peak as part of this. So this alternative here was set up to collect that same overall 12% increase in our costs for the first 2 years, and then the 4%, and 3%, should the customers choose to go down this path as an option as part of that. So what you'll see here is we've kept the same customer charge, but then on our energy, our kilowatt hour charge, it's currently that 14 and almost 15 cents. Our peak period would jump up to 22 cents, so from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. And then all other hours are just below that at 14.68 cents. So that would give that price signal at that time during our peak period use, where it would be slightly higher charge overall. And again, as we look at this, we did the same thing with our non-permanent residents, if they were to opt into that, or if you wanted to offer that to those customers as part of this. On the pilot EV rate, this would be for our non-residential customers. Kind of went back and looked at some of the characteristics again on the system. The EV charging accounts for 1.5% of the total kilowatt hours, but 5% of the total demand. That's based on 2022 data. I will say we know that's probably going to increase over time as more charging stations are added locally, regionally, across the country as we move down this path as part of that. And there's different types of charging stations out there as well. So there's some fast or quote superchargers. They're on that larger end. They're the medium to large commercial customers for you all based on your rate schedules. And then there's a handful of our what are known as level 2, which are much smaller demands. They'd fit in our small commercial class essentially from a demand perspective as part of that. And so this curve here, over here, this is the actual curve of the EV customers' use as part of that. So you can see again, kind of down in the morning, 6, 7 in the morning, not a lot. It starts picking up, and the gray is our time of use period that we identified for our residential customers, which also coincides pretty nicely with our peak EV use that we see out there on the system. And after about 8, 9 o'clock, it starts dropping down where we have less charging going on. So as we started talking about this internally, looking at what other folks do, then we came back to a recommendation of applying a time of use rate for the energy, the kilowatt hour charge, but we would maintain the demand charge or the KW charge from the respective commercial schedule as part of that. So that would be if they're a medium commercial today, they would pay that medium commercial demand charge, but they would pay the time of use rate based on for an energy rate as part of that. So trying to capture, again, look at those peaks, how they're driving the costs on the system as we go through this. And then a clean energy rate for all rates. We've kind of coined this our clean energy. This would be an optional rate for all district electric rates as part of that. Again, this would be something that could be implemented in 2024. However, we wouldn't have that information and reporting year for 2025, so we could start looking at what those designated energy costs are and then have this based on our 2023 data and information. So this to the right is an example of what this could look like as part of it, looking at that green rate, looking at our standard rate, and then in this case, it compares it to the California utility average The red bar over here is part of that. But ultimately, looking at what is that overall green rate for customers, what we've looked at as part of this, we did a couple different things as we started evaluating this, looking at your cost profile from a purchase power perspective. What is that differential in rates? As you all well know, that can vary from year to year and time to time, just depending on what the current markets are, how you're purchasing your power, and the timing of that. And so we're looking at a recommendation of a 5% increase to our base rate for each customer class. And then that's ultimately something that can be adjusted as you go through time as part of that. So these revenues that come through this could then be used as you move forward with additional green power purchases. There's some folks that'll will buy our green energy credits as part of that. So there's some different options that may be available to the board as you move forward with this, depending on how customers respond to this and how the board would like to move forward with that. And then finally, our power cost adjustment. And really, this is coming back to account for immediate changes in your purchase power costs, either an increase or a decrease as part of this. And so we've got a couple of examples here, right? So we have example one, our wildfire smoke reduces the output of solar generator, causing the PUD to buy more expensive power, resulting in the need for short-term purchase power funded by short-term increases to the PCA. So this is where we could look at this and say, okay, we need to buy this amount of power, given the situation we're in. The average cost is this. We add this PCA power cost adjustment to the bills at that point in time as part of that. Another example would be is we have a battery storage project that avoids the high demand expenses during the peak months, so we don't have to do what we did in option one. You can actually reduce that PCA at that point in time. Now, what's interesting is you'll have folks over the years as we've worked with folks, we have some folks that may adjust this on a monthly basis, on a quarterly, semi-annual, and annual basis. As I mentioned at the beginning, most of the times it's looking backwards. That's not always the case. There are some folks that build it forward. I like looking backwards because we know our costs, right? We know what we're trying to recover in that time period, whether it's a month or a year. We can do that, and then that PCA just continues to run. At some point, it needs to be reset, where we include those costs in the base rate, our kilowatt hour charge that we have, our energy charge is part of that. And then you start the process over, depending on where the rates go, where our power markets go as part of this. So again, this doesn't require any estimating as we look backwards. It really protects you all as a district from any undue financial impacts due to changes in the market or situations like we've shown here in the examples where you have increased purchase power costs. We now have a method that you can implement to recover those costs, short or long term, as part of this process. So our recommendation is to put that PCA in place. What it would be is, starting in 2024, it would be zero, because in our current rate projections, we have our assumed cost of power in there. As you move forward, either partway through 2024 or at the end of 2024, you could look at that and say, okay, we estimated this many dollars, and I was going to say a number, but I don't remember it, so I don't want to spit it out there. And we don't collect that, or it costs more than we thought. You can implement that PCA, and you add that charge per kilowatt hour to the customer's bill to recover that. Or, as we talked about in example one, you know you're going out for another purchase of some expensive power. You figure out that cost per kilowatt hour, and you can add that to the bill. And then once that's recovered, you turn that off and that goes away. So a bit of an administrative tracking and managing, but ultimately protects you all from big impacts like you've seen in the past, where you've had significant increases in your purchase power costs, that you're able to pass that along and recover that a little bit quicker, rather than using all your rate reserves, as an example, and then having to refill that bucket with rate adjustments, which is part of the story we're looking at today, right? We have that downward trend in our reserves. How do we smooth those out and level those out over time? So we just went through a whole lot of stuff for y'all. So really what we're looking at is, what is that ideal overall system revenue adjustments, the percentages that we're looking at. The current status quo rates are across-the-board adjustments, making sure you all are comfortable with those regardless of the rate percentage alternative. And then thoughts, input, direction that you all have on our rate alternatives and opportunities that we put together, those last 4 items that we've talked about as part of that. Based on that, then we would finalize the technical analysis, which is really there. Again, it's more of if the board directs us to make some little minor changes, we'll do those as part of that. Get that written report together, and then we'd be back in front of you on November 1, looking at a presentation of those final rates and holding that public hearing to adopt those proposed rates. So with that, I will turn it back over to the board for any questions that you may have for us.
Great, thank you, Sean. Is there any public comment on this item? Silent, so
There is none. No public comment.
all right. So now we can talk about it. What do you think, Joe?
Well, I was gonna think or ask Sean, it's a 12-12-4 increase per year. How can we determine that we can come back down to 4 after 2 years when everything seems to be all the time going up?
So part of it is, as I mentioned, there's a couple things that have changed since you all looked at this last. Some of that's our O&M costs, some of that's our purchase power costs, some of that's our capital plan. And then part of it is maintaining adequate financial metrics, making sure we have the reserve targets that the board has established as part of the electric utility. And so that 12% kind of turns the line to where we're not going below our minimum reserve targets, and then we start growing above our minimum reserve target.
It's like a catch-up then.
Correct, yeah. We've got to kind of right that ship to get us back to where we're above our minimum targets based on our projections. We're looking at 2 years for 24 and 25. So then as you go through 25, you could be looking at, okay, are those lines going where we think they're going? Or is inflation outstripping our assumptions that we built into the model? Which, if I tell you, if I knew that, I'd be on a beach, having a nice cold drink somewhere. But as we look at this, that's really what our driver is trying to just get this back right-sized, back to where we need to be. And there's the alternatives to get there as well, bringing that down and pushing out the out years. But again, understanding that if we pull down today, we have to have something out here, because I agree with you, where's inflation going? It's at a minimum, we're gonna be in that 4% range, I think, in the next couple of years, to accomplish that.
Then it drops to 3.
It does, that's our projection.
But the thing, to me, is it's still, all the costs and everything is still going up and stuff. Lots more than it is right now. And we caught up with those 2 years at 12, So we're back at 4, which I don't think is too bad. That's good, beautiful. But are we, okay, nothing's guaranteed, but we know that that's what's gonna happen, you think? By your analysis?
I would say in the short term, yes. I would say that I think we're okay short term.
But it is now, like it is now,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Long term, I'm not gonna make any promises to you.
okay. That's what I was asking, the long term, when we dropped to 4 and 3,
Yeah.
so, okay.
And we're looking at a 2-year rate setting period, so I think that gives the board and staff time to, react if we see something happening that we're not assuming in the model today.
And we can change that in the middle of the year, say?
You'd have to go through the.
Adjustment?
You'd have to go through the rate setting process to do
Yeah,
that.
okay, okay.
But as an example, if the board desired to implement a PCA, the power cost adjustment, that is something that would just go as needed. So if purchase power were the driving factor in the discussion of increases in our costs, we could recover that more quickly through that PCA process.
We won't know until we get into the 4th or 5th year there.
3rd or 4th year, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you, Sean.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joe. Kim's got a question.
Yes, I do have a question. Thank you very much for all this information. It's always a pleasure to watch what you do up here, and just, you tell a great story, and you're able to kind of bring everybody in and educate us, which I appreciate.
Thank you.
The PCA, is that included in the 12%, or is that above and beyond?
That would be above and beyond. So that's where it would start 2024 at 0. And then as you move through the year, if something came up where you had to go out on the market and buy power, and we knew it was above and beyond what we built into our power costs for 2024, you could trigger that. And you could adjust that to recover those costs as you move forward. You know, whatever that cost would be on a per kilowatt hour basis, spread amongst all customers, all PUD customers.
And is there a minimum and a max, well, obviously minimum 0, is there a maximum that we can go?
Actually, it can go negative.
Okay.
It could technically go negative as part of that. I would say you have to be meeting all of your other financial metrics, our minimum reserves, et cetera. But no, they're really, you as a board could put a maximum on that PCA. However, that means we're recovering something more than that from somewhere else, whether that's our existing reserves or other rates that we have out there, or our rate revenue that we've established as part of this.
Okay.
So it's really there to reflect the change in purchase power costs. And so it's directly related to what that change would be in your overall cost profile for power purchases.
So it's basically a tool in our toolbox in case something happens, we can say, well, we've adopted this, so we
Yep.
can move forward with it. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, real quick, just for consideration, last spring, we had this discussion about the gas price spikes that caused our energy prices to go up across the entire western region. And so the district's approach to mitigate those costs and kind of insulate our customers was to go into our rate reserves. And so Mike Salmon will also talk about it in the budget later on this evening, but we had a couple discussions in the past where the board asked staff to consider other tools that didn't dip into reserves so aggressively, but gave another way to kind of temper that impact to our customers. And so the board could absolutely, as Sean pointed out, put a threshold or a boundary within that power cost adjustment that if it exceeds a certain percent increase, we go to reserves, and vice versa. If it gets below a certain, we replenish reserves. And so Mike's going to talk about later, with consideration of rates, the speed at which we replenish our reserves from last summer or last winter, and then how we manage those moving forward. So this is a great tool for consideration.
Okay, I also had another question. So we have programs to help low-income families. So if the rates go up a bit, what kind of programs do we have? I know we have some of the energy saving that they go to your house and help you find.
Yeah,
graphics.
that's something we need to continue to evolve and develop. We have several funds. Some of the board had authorized funds to go into financial assistance funds that came from our community benefits funds that we had. Kind of the post-COVID, we put financial hardship reserves in place for folks that qualify to reach out and gain access to. As we start the board adopting new rates, we need to consider the adjustments or additional funding opportunities that we can provide some of that help.
Any thoughts, Tony?
No, I guess the idea of a rate reserve and the PCA, sorry, they're kind of complementary, I think, and I appreciate Brian's little color on that because I think as a board, we were sitting there struggling, okay, is it a 3-year payback? Is it a 2-year payback? Is it a 5-year payback? We really, because there was no guidance and no document or no policy on how to navigate that. It doesn't mean that we still can't go down the road of deciding those things, but I think that PCA is an idea that we can have, the option to do it a little more nimbly and, be a little more nimble in getting payback going. and as Brian mentioned, maybe setting thresholds to say, if it's X percent, we're not going to dip into the reserve. We're going to just put this adder on, or if it's, what are the thresholds of different, so I think it's good. I assume some agencies have both. I assume some agencies have one or the other. And so it wouldn't be unique to us to have both.
No, not at all. And I think they, like you mentioned, they're complementary to each other, right? And there may be times where it's not feasible to add to the PCA as an example. And so you're able to pull from reserves, or vice versa, right? You're able to add to the PCA and not pull your reserves down below their targets as part of that. So there are folks that just have a PCA.
Right.
And there's folks that have neither, right? So it's just a matter of how you're managing.
They're the
your
ones in trouble right
utilities.
now.
There's also, on that same point, there's different causes for rate variability. And so last year, we experienced kind of the crossing of many unfortunate events. The gas price increases, we had one of our generation plants go down for maintenance. And so there may be times where we know the energy spike is intermittent, and we have strong evidence that supports that. We may not go to a PCA. Board may give us authorization to dip to the reserves because we know it's intermittent and it's not worth going into a power cost adjustment.
Yeah, no, I mean, my initial kind of thought is, from a high level, it looks like the board has the ability to quickly change rates. And from a transparency and, sort of, it can look a little bit dicey, and I feel like it can work if we have a solid policy on how we use it and why we use it, and the reasons why we would implement it, because, it ultimately, it puts a lot of power in our hands to raise rates, for good reason, but there is a transparency part to that whole discussion, that's a little concerning, so I would recommend that if we go down that road, we be very thoughtful in how we craft a policy to use it. But other than that, I appreciate, as Kim mentioned, all the hard work and how you sort of color everything for us to see it in clear and, easy terms to understand. I feel at the end of the day, there's always alternatives on how you adjust rates. I feel like the current recommendation probably has, pretty good merit. And then I would probably lean towards maybe the second alternative, the 10-10, roughly 10-10, 5-5 or whatever, as potential as a second alternative. So that's where I'm at.
Nice. Christopher.
Right on. It sounds like all of our minds are going along the same path here. Kim's initial questions were exactly my initial questions, and Tony continued to expand upon that. And I felt the same way. I think a PCA is a very intriguing tool with guardrails. If we have situations like last December where it was such a spike, I don't think anybody would appreciate us the very next month, tripling people's bill, like what happened to us. I mean, that's what we dipped into our reserve for millions of dollars to cover that. So I do think there have to be guardrails, limits on the upper end of what we would use that to collect. But I do like the idea of doing it sort of as we go versus us annually or biannually trying to refund our reserves to get them back up to healthy levels after an event like that. I also, it would be great, like you said, theoretically, we can give people credits on their bill, because that's ultimately what our electrical side is going to be working on, is to reduce our exposure to the vicissitudes of the market. of the power markets. That's where we, run into trouble, or that's where trouble happened. That's not where we run into trouble last year. And like Brian said, it was compounding events that our gas was offline during those crazy spikes. So theoretically, if we continue to make conservative energy purchases or that bringing down the price of our power purchase agreements, then, people will be getting money back. And I kind of like that potential. I understand that it's not a given, that it will happen. Shifting to some of the other things that you brought up, the green rate, I know it seems like I would be all for a green rate, but I still feel like it's misleading a little bit for power procurement purchases because mostly green energy is the least expensive energy to be purchased. So I still feel like there's that educational component that I don't want to give people the idea that green energy is more expensive, because it's not. So theoretically, people who choose a green rate should be paying less than the people who don't. I would like to flip that on its head and have a dirty rate. And if you choose dirty energy, you get to pay more. Well, if you use energy at peak times, and we know it's coal, you get to pay more. And I guess that's what the time of use gets us to, right? Without being mean about it, like I just was.
No, I like it. I like the dirty
So,
rate.
that-
That's what we're calling it. No,
Yeah, it's like now, well, you're gonna pay the filthy energy rate, and it's very expensive. And that's just an accurate reflection of the energy markets. It's just being honest. So time of use rates, I feel like there's real potential as we begin to see EV uptake and electrification take hold, as we know it is going to do, because the state of California is moving us in that direction. And we really are going to want to change people's behavior to middle of the day usage when our solar, even existing, we have about 10%. And moving forward, it'll probably be more if we can change our customers' behaviors to take advantage of it, right? So I think that could be a really useful tool for us as well, to keeping that in mind, maybe not this 2 years, but the next 2 years, or getting ahead of it a little bit and start those encouraging financial drivers, start making it a habit, and then when we really need it, we'll be used to doing it, right? We'll be used to charging our EVs at our house or at our place of employment during the middle of the day instead of overnight. And that's what, when we talk about commercial EV charging, not residential, this isn't our folks who are plugging in at home.
Correct.
These are people who are using the chargers that are around town. And are those like specifically branded, like Tesla and Rivian? Do we have some that are more accessible to all sorts of vehicles, and is that a different rate?
So it would be the same for all we would have that same time of use rate. And then depending on the size, where they fit into our primarily medium and large commercial categories today, they would pay that demand charge, that KW charge and customer charge component, like they do today. It would just be that time of use rate added to it for that same 4 to 9 p.m. timeframe. So you're correct, it's the commercial, it's not somebody pulls into their garage and they plug it in at home. It's the ones around town out here. And they are different, there's different ones around town.
Okay. So are folks who do drive an EV during the day and they come home and charge it at night, which is kind of when they have to because they're driving around during the day. I also don't want to discourage people from buying EVs. That doesn't seem like I want to encourage them. So
Well, I guess it comes down to when they charge, right?
Yes.
It does.
If the peak is 4 to 9, they can schedule a charger to come on at 9:01.
Oh, see? That's, technology is saving me once again.
Yeah, if I might
My
add,
simple mind did not get there.
if I might add, where the time of use rate that's proposed was for residential, permanent residential only. And so for EVs, it's a similar approach where it can be incentivizing alternative charging characteristics. And so it may cost more money if you choose to charge your vehicle and create that additional load during our peak load that already exists. And so there's also an incentive for the commercial vehicles to charge, or the electric vehicles to charge at commercial charging stations during the off-peak time and save money. So it's not disincentivizing it, it's putting a program that incentivizing the change in behavior that helps continue to create resiliency in our grid and our supply.
Okay. So on that note, I think a time of use rate will be very useful, and I think a PCA policy can help us to, weather the ups and downs that all of the energy markets are experiencing for the next 5 years, let's say.
Also, one quick additional point with the potential pilot for a green energy rate, and I hear your concerns. The increase, the 5, is to the base rate. And so in certain scenarios, and probably likely as this continues to evolve, a green rate would be less. Because your base rate would go up, but your actual energy procurement portfolio might work, to recover that cost. And so it's not, we can talk about it more. I hear the questioning where we need to develop a more robust example and kind of a formula here for you. But we're just trying to get seed for thought for the board. We had this discussion, I think, about 8 months ago, where it was just a blanket increase, opt-in, and it really didn't, it didn't really fit the goals of the district and really didn't incentivize that type of, progress. And so we want to continue to evolve a program that works for us, but the actual green rate, customers would still have to be accountable for our base portfolio, but any incremental improvements, they'd get either the benefit or the cost of. And so it'd be an opt-in program. It sounds a little more, I'm not explaining it completely clearly, but it's a complex kind of model. The base rate is really because it requires additional work for the staff to go out and procure these energies and manage this program.
Okay, so yeah, I do think I need more education. And if I need more education, probably most of our customers need more education too. So yeah, I think I would like to continue to discuss that. And I know we've also had discussions about a green rate that's doesn't go towards energy procurement, but goes towards efficiency upgrades, for example, for our community members who are less able to do that themselves. So like I would pay for somebody else's efficiency upgrades, for example, to the extent that I, am able to pay more on my bill if I opt in to something that helps us green our, so that was another, it's not part of this discussion, I don't think. I just went out of out of the territory, but I just am throwing that out there for everybody else to think about. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Can you go back to the time of use slide?
EV or residential?
Residential. So if I'm understanding that correctly, so just using fiscal year '24 as an example for permanent residents, the difference is about 0.2 cents between so 0.1486 versus 0.1468, is that right?
Yes, for the off-peak, yes.
So you're saying that if we didn't offer anything, they'd be paying 0.1486. If we did offer it, they'd be paying 0.1468 during all other hours, but then and then during peak hours, it'd be 23 cents roughly.
Correct.
So is that simply a calculation to offset the reduction of the off-peak rate? That's how much we have to charge per kilowatt hour to meet the revenue requirements?
Correct. We went through and looked at what is our kilowatt hours from 4 to 9 and every other time. What would that rate have to be to generate that target revenue, including the percentage adjustment for 24 for the residential customers. So this rate here as a whole applied to all residential customers would recover the same amount as our status quo, our current rate structure proposed for 2024. It's just the timing of the kilowatt hours and the pricing in there. And what we tried to do is tried to give that differential in there to try and incentivize, right, especially when folks are using power, back to our earlier time, going to the EV chart, because it had a nice chart, right, pushing it to the left of the gray there as part of it.
Which everyone with an induction cooktop is then penalized when they're setting up and cooking at night.
It's
So
tricky.
I personally am still struggling with the time of use. It's just like, that's when everyone gets home from work. You show up at your house and now you're cooking, everyone's home, kids are there, you're charging phones, working on computers, you're cooking.
Yeah, that's true.
your
You
tur-
can't
all
set
your
dinner
lights are
time to
on.
go later.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah,
tougher
it's
one,
like,
huh?
so, I'm still kind of it's like, what is the ultimate goal of the time of use? So it's like, okay,
flatten
now
the
we're
duck
getting
curve, huh?
penalized for just
Flatten the
coming
curve.
home.
It's to flatten the curve.
Right.
Yeah, but we can, I'm sure there's gotta be room in there, like, doing the laundry or put off running the dishwasher till the morning. Like it gives us a good incentive to leave the dishes in the sink, which I kind of like. I'm for. I'm pro that. So, I think that is an interesting, what will the actual behavioral changes look like?
Right.
I don't know.
Well, it's just from from the initial analysis, it's like that 0.002 cents a kilowatt hour, in my mathematical brain just doesn't add up. And it'd be like, why would I do time of use?
Well, to avoid paying the 22 cents.
Right. No, I get
Okay,
it. But
sorry, I'm sorry.
I just don't see the value to customers to make that shift.
And it would be optional.
Yeah.
Sure, no, I
So
get it,
It
yeah.
might be the folks that can shift
Yeah,
as part of that.
And the overall intent, the driver behind it is to change behavior. And so that is the incentive, some of the big demands or draws, whether it's your own personal EVs or other activities you have in your home, shifting those to off-peak hours. Clearly, some activities we do at home are going to be in that peak time. That's just our cycle of life when we come home from work or kids come home, whatever it might be. But changing behavior, one of the things we've talked about with CTA and some of the other local agencies is how do we change behavior? Well, this is one option to opt in. And we can, all of these are, we put the pilot term up there intentionally to kind of begin a program, see what the uptake is, subscription to it is, and maybe we need to adjust it and continue to look at what those rates, modulate those so they actually are more effective.
right. Yeah, no, I agree. It's kind of a, do you just like dabble your toe in the water a little bit? Which is kind of the way I see like that first year. And some people will take it and some people won't versus, because I don't see that big of a benefit, other than the people who really have the mindset that they want to change and flatten the curve.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how many of those people are out there. I get it, because, in other areas where they struggle at, especially in the Cal ISO situations where they're struggling to meet peak demand, I can see where the benefit of these programs come into play. And it's not necessarily, that there has to be a balance, because the utilities really need that curve to flatten. And so they need the customers to subscribe to that program. And so they need to incentivize it a little more aggressively.
Would it be helpful if we came back with kind of a model of a typical customer characteristic and what that would look like with a shift in their demand, with a couple different scenarios?
Would it be helpful?
What do you mean, like
Well, yeah,
Or-
just the cost, right?
is that the curve you're talking, is that our curve, the duck curve?
Our personal duck curve?
Is that our personal?
Not the impact to the agents, not to the district, but to a customer's bill.
Oh.
If they were to subscribe to this program, take a average customer, if they shifted a % of their load or demand, some of their demand to off-peak, what it would look like.
I mean, I would think that the goal, if you're a customer and your goal was to reduce your energy bill by utilizing time of use, I don't think what was presented for '24 would really be an incentive, because it was hardly, in my opinion, it hardly moves the needle. But if there was a way to quantify that, and sort of provide a model to say, here's the difference, and here's 0.002 cents a difference in kilowatt hours versus half a cent or something like that, to see what moves the needle, where you can say, yeah, I think people would really, jump on that, because there is a cost savings there.
I think they would.
And of course, then the benefit of that is behavioral change and reduction in our curve. I don't know.
Or do you look at it as we're penalizing you because you're using more energy, your energy between the hours of 4 and 9?
Yeah, of course, I mean,
Yeah.
it's- but.
Which is
because
when
it's
everybody's
Well,
on.
but it's opt-in, so they're penalizing themselves.
That's true.
We're training ourselves. We're training ourselves for the future where we have 100% solar
No,
energy.
we're not forcing it on anyone, it is opt-in.
It's
so.
optional shot collar,
Yes, yes, yes. And some of us are gluttons.
I don't know, I think some examples would be helpful, of some different differentials, and what that means to customers as far as cost.
And the district is a bit unique in a good way, in that when you look at your purchase power profile, you don't have the peak you mentioned. You don't have these spikes in your demand depending on, from a purchase power perspective. It is relatively flat. So this really does get back to your goals and objectives on how you want to think about your customers' behavior, where we're going in the future with all of this, and how do we start shifting people, one way or the other on our little chart here to where they need to be when we are all solar, and however many years that's gonna take, right? How are we gonna move that needle to get everybody where we wanna be?
I think I like that phrasing, that's what we're just, fantasy world, if we have to depend 100% on solar energy because we want to get to 100%, then we have to use our energy in those hours.
Yep.
So whatever we can start to chip away at the edges is not necessarily bad, because some of it's very painless, like charging your car or taking a shower in the morning versus in the evening. You're right, though, I have to cook dinner at 6 or 7. There's no way around it. Crock pots, okay, there you go. There is a way around it. Slow cookers.
Taught on a timer.
Yeah, true that.
One of the things that the time of use rate also helps set the foundation for is our successor NEM program. And
Yep.
so that's really important for us to also consider. It's not, from an opt-in perspective, it's not just, your kind of run-of-the-mill customer that's the only consideration here. It's as we start to develop and board approve our rooftop solar program, our NEM successor program, the time of use rate is going to be really important.
That's true. What are we gonna have to pay them or not pay them? Yeah, true that. Okay.
Yeah, so I think for making sure Sean has clear direction, I guess, I personally like option 1, what you guys all recommended, for the 12-12 model.
As do I.
Can we put those options back up?
Yeah, absolutely.
What I liked about that one is it drops to 4.
Right.
Theoretically, yeah.
Just- And you're talking $8 or so a month, that's not even a beer downtown, right? Yeah, so it just. Right. One less beer a month, I think.
Well, that's a lot.
Yeah, right.
That's hard to absorb.
Those are important beers, right? So, I really like the idea of the PCA with the policy written in there. I'm still not sold on the green rate, and I'm still struggling with the time of use rate, but then there were pilot programs, so that's okay, yeah.
Is that what you wanted to see?
Yeah.
Could you also bring up the chart where you have the profiles? Yeah.
The reserves or the rates?
No, the reserves.
Tony, your option, your second vote was the red.
So purple is,
Purple's the 15%
15%.
front-loaded.
so
Yeah.
what's recommended is the blue, where we just, we stay above the line.
Correct.
Alternative, my second kind of perhaps alternative one was the 10-10,
Yeah.
5-5. That, we dipped slightly below, but we're talking $500,000, maybe $1 million at most. So it's pretty innocuous difference between the two as far as from a risk perspective, saying that we're dipping into reserves that, this much. I think on the whole scheme of things, it's single-digit percentages. But I think I don't see a material difference between the 12 and the 10, sort of from a gut perspective, sitting up here. And I think that it keeps us on the right side of the balance line, and I think it's, while nobody wants their rates raised, I think it's acceptable at this point in time, because we're all feeling it. And double-digit rate increases are going to be happening everywhere.
Yeah, they are.
In every aspect of your life, I feel like right now, so.
I feel the original would give us more of an opportunity not to implement a PCA. Just a little bit, right?
I think it gives us more flexibility, but, and it builds the balances a little bit quicker, and so when we get to 26 through 28, we have more flexibility, because ultimately we're not talking about 26 through 28 right now, because that's,
Right. 4 years out.
but, based on our projections, 4% rate increases, I think, would be welcome during those out years. But as Joe said, everything's going up.
There's no guarantees, are there?
No guarantees, but I think it puts us in a better financial position and a stronger foundation early to be able to be more flexible in the future.
Okay.
Was that,
Any other
was
thoughts?
that clear enough for us all?
I'm still, I'm
Oh,
gonna have
okay.
to think about it, like, until next time, but
Okay.
we're not telling you one of these right now.
Right.
We will have all these options, so.
We just need to approve or have a motion for the public hearing and scheduling that, I believe, correct? Steve's nodding his head, so.
We'll put that back up here in a few minutes when
Okay.
the workshop's over.
Okay,
We're good.
all right. Should we just, wait, workshop? No, this is action item. Or,
He's coming.
oh, wait. Oh,
Mr. Korn.
oh, okay. Thank you, Brian.
So I just wanted, for staff, to summarize, for the next board meeting, we'll have, if the board schedules a public hearing, prior to the public hearing, or part of the public hearing process, and coming back to the board, some clarification on a few items for consideration. We don't necessarily, as the board pointed out, have to adopt at that time the pilot programs. It's something we should continue to consider. We are looking for rates to be adopted to fund 2024, fiscal 24, so Grant can start the billing process right away. That's a whole process for him to do as well, so he needs that in advance. The other programs we can continue to evaluate, but I'd like to come back to the board with some of the clarifications, some of the additional modeling for further discussion, if that's okay for the board.
For me. Yes,
And be
Sounds
ready
good.
to vote,
to discuss and, yeah, to discuss
yeah,
and then make a
discuss and
decision.
vote for the rate.
Yep.
For the rates at
The
the
rates,
minimum.
yeah.
And model those pilot programs on the premise of the recommended and alternative one is what I heard. Or are you good with the,
The recommended was the PCA, and the alternative would be the time of use?
oh, yes.
Okay. Did
Or-
I confuse
Or no,
everybody?
I'm all in for the original, but Tony's liking alternative one, so Brian's asking, should they dive in and model
Got
out the
you.
10 and a half?
Okay, one was 12-12.
Correct, yeah. So,
Yeah, that's the one I was headed for.
yeah, Brian's wondering if he should model out alternative one, which is 10 and a half, 10 and a half, 5, 5.
And it may help with some of the budget discussion later this evening also. So
Okay.
we'll come back with some additional data. Thanks.
Okay.
So we got the hearing set?
Not
For
yet,
November
not yet.
Oh, we're still on the,
Poncelet is taking us
oh, I'm
there.
sorry.
We have dueling. There we go. So, a public hearing regarding the proposed electric utility rate increases is requested for November 1st, 2023. Tonight, we is scheduling that public hearing for the proposed electric utility rate increases, and I'm hearing we're bringing two options, which is the original and alternative one, to be decided on November 1st. New time of use rates and new purchase power adjustment factor. And again, the PCA is something that becomes put in place through policy, and the other rate structures, the green rate or the EV rate or time of use, would come as a pilot. November 1, also consideration of an ordinance to increase electric rates. And so that is the timeline that would allow Mr. Sachs to do his work and get it done. And then the rates would be effective with the first bill printed after January 1st of each year, beginning in 2024 as applicable. So that's the time frame for implementation. There is no direct fiscal impact associated with this item, but obviously we're talking about rates and customer bills, so the actions you take in the future clearly have a fiscal impact. And so the recommendation is to receive this report and provide direction to staff, and I believe you have what you need. Thank you. And then the second recommendation, B, is to schedule a public hearing at the regularly scheduled district board meeting on November 1st, 2023 at 6 p.m. or as soon thereafter for the purpose of receiving input on the adoption of an ordinance, adoption of proposed electric rate increases, new time of use rates, and power cost adjustments for the years 2024 and 2025. Be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you.
I'll move staff's recommendation.
I second that movement.
Okay, could we have roll call, please?
President Bender,
Yes.
Vice President Laliotis.
Yes.
Director Harris.
Yes.
Director Aguera.
Yes.
Director Finn.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Nice. Okay. 7:30. Should we take a quick restroom break? Because I think Mike has it up for us. Is there? Okay, yeah, let's take 5, Mike, and then we're gonna be ready for you. All right, Mike, you ready?
You got rid of half the room.
I'm ready. I have a pen and a backup pen
Okay, they're in calculator.
and a calculator. All right, thank you. Good evening, President Bender, members of the board. This is agenda item number 8, Budget 2024 and 2025, workshop number 3, October 18th, 2023. I'm Mike Salmon, Director of, or Chief Financial Officer here for the district. And that was a great rates presentation by HDR. So this presentation tonight will give a lot of the background behind some of his assumptions for 24 and 25 and thereafter. So I'm going to quickly touch on the budget timeline tonight, give an information and assumptions update on various items. Then we'll dive into the electric utilities information, the water utilities information. We'll touch again on capital expenditures, can dive in there if you guys want. We went in depth on that at the previous workshop. Personnel we'll talk about, overheads, financial master plan and reserves, and close it with COSA and rates, kind of tying in with the previous presentation. So as I mentioned, this is workshop number 3. We've had 2 previous workshops in August, one in August, one in September, and we have a scheduled November 1st public hearing and action item to review and approve the budget for 24 and 25. Did want to touch on it. I use a lot of acronyms and abbreviations throughout my presentations, not just tonight, but over all the time frames. So I just want to throw a few together. I'll create a grid in the staff reports and the others going forward. But these are just a few that I utilize. If I use one and you're not sure what it means, please do stop me and I'll clarify. But I also have, in this presentation tonight, links to the staff report and its various attachments if we needed to dive into the detail. As I've mentioned before, budget is a balancing act. It's a bit of mostly science, but certainly a bit of art as well, balancing all the many variables and drivers through all the components, balancing the mission and values of the organization, our goals, reserve balances, debt service, capital investment, et cetera. Keeping a focus on the mission, values, and goals with full transparency to everyone in the room, as well as our consumers, our customers, our accounts. I'm sure they'll be viewing online tonight's presentation. Do see one here tonight. So just a refresher on the last 4 months of inflation. The most recent figure for the U.S. was 3.7 year over year. The CPI core for the U.S. was 4.1. For specific for the Bay Area, that comes out every 2 months. The October figure will come out in November. The August figure was 3.3 for CPIW. At a United States level for electricity, the year over year in September was 2.6. So September's index for U.S. electricity was up 2.6% to a previous year. For San Francisco, Oakland, Hayward, it was 14%. And 12 the previous month, 12 the previous month, and 6 back in June. Timing of rate increases, things like that. Some more inflation information here. On the left is 2021 to 2023 view of inflation. And the reason why I picked that is in 2021 was when we were doing the current budget that we're in cycle, right? And that we had a little bit of inflation, but inflation was barely talked about. It was just starting to bubble as transitory. Sorry, that's a bad word now.
but it was transitory at the time, and it had been previously, we had many, I want to say years, if not certainly, 18 to 24 months of very low inflation. But when you look at 21 to 2023, you're at about a 6% inflation rate to now, and then on average. And then in San Francisco, it's a 4.5% compounded annual growth rate of inflation. A dollar for the U.S., a dollar in 2021 is now $1.14, which is almost 14% higher. And then a dollar in in the Bay Area is now $100 back in 2021 is now $109, to give it perspective. On the right is taking a longer-term view of inflation, because inflation does have volatility in it. If you look at it over the long term, the 5-year USA inflation rate is 4%, and for the Bay Area is 3.4%, and the 10-year inflation rate is 2.8% for the US and 3.3% for the Bay Area. And you'll see those gaps. The gap between the U.S. and the Bay Area was tighter back in 2013 than it is now, and that's because the U.S. inflation rate ran for the last 10 years at 2.8 versus San Francisco ran at 3.3. So slightly higher, so now there's an even bigger gap between the two figures. This is information on electricity in the Bay Area, and the 1-year growth rate on their index is 14%, and the 5-year is a 11%, 10.6% increase in inflation for the 5 years. So that's a compounded annual growth rate over the 5 years, 14 and 10 1 year, 14 1 year, and almost 11 for the 5-year. Looking over 10 years, the average rate increase has been 7%. So that was the index. There's also a BLS statistic with respect to the cost of electricity per kilowatt hour, and the 5-year for the Bay Area is 10.6, which matches the previous schedule, and the 1-year is 12.2. It's off a little bit from the previous because this one comes out later. This is an August figure, not a September figure. BLS does not publish California as a whole information. They only do regions and markets within California, and then they do the Pacific, which is California, Washington, and Oregon, and Alaska, and Hawaii. So I didn't find that really relevant. But I did find EIA's information specific to California residential on a cost per kilowatt hour value metric, and the growth rates there. The 1 year, again, this lags, the data is through July, was almost 11% year over year. And this is, again, for California, and 8.6% is the 5-year compounded annual growth rate. Annual increase is 8.6%. Looking specifically here at the district, this is the history of rate increases for the district: 2.33, 2.73, 8.5 in 2022, and 6.5 this year. These are estimated averages, rate impacts that we've approved over the past 7 years. The 5-year average is a 4.7, compares to those 8.6s and 10s that I was discussing previously. 8.6 in California, 10.6 in the Bay Area. So I just want to add put some context into that, specific to electricity. Fuel prices, no real change from last time I presented this. You will notice that the gap continues to grow between the U.S. market and California market, and things have been ratcheting up. I'm told they're going to be ratcheting down soon, particularly here in California. We'll see. This is the mix. Just to give a perspective of the mix of the costs within the operating costs within the electric and water annual operating expenses. The blue bar on the left is purchase power, and then everything in the middle is everything else electric, and on the right is water. And this breaks down labor costs, pumping power, wildfire mitigation, vendor expenses, and transportation overheads at the top bar. And this next excuse me. This next is the same information, but on a total of 100% basis. And you'll see that payroll costs, labor costs are about 57% for electric, 55% for water. 12% is our wildfire mitigation cost. The 26% is vendor expenses, accounts payable for electric, and it's the same percentage for water. So found that interesting. And then our overheads add 5% to the operating cost. No material assumption changes since the last workshop when we met. I won't read through these, but it's detailed. A lot of this is detailed in the rest of the presentation as well as the staff report. If I was to pick a theme for this budget cycle, it would be resilience. So I looked up some definitions of resilience: the capacity to respond, ability to react appropriately. This is something I found on LinkedIn, kind of grouping the various areas of domains of resilience. Found interesting. So it's all about balance and perspective and keeping it all together. And then I also found this one, which I liked. You can read it here. All right, diving into the electric utility. This is the summary level for the electric utilities general fund and other activities. This is the same information that's presented in previous board budget cycles for many years, just at a summarized level. It's revenues less expenses is operating income, and then you have a bunch of several non-operating activities specific to electric. We have a new one here for rate reserve replenishment. $376,000, I'll get into that. And we have the AB 32 use of funds, which is specific to electric. This next page is the same information, but for 24 budget and 25 budget, so you can see 24 and 25 on one page and the changes. The revenue expectations on both of these are in alignment with HDR's primary alternative, which was the 1212, as far as percent increase in electric rates. So this next page, this slide presents all the drivers, the changes, the incremental changes from budget 2023 to budget 2024. And I had to group them because there's hundreds of them, right? And you saw that in the staff report, right? And so I grouped them. Maybe I didn't group them perfectly for everyone, but I grouped them as best I could to add some semblance to the chaos and put it together. And so the percentage column is the adds to 12%. So this is the rate impact of these changes from budget 2023 that had a revenue expectation and a revenue requirement to budget 2024. And this, again, is in alignment with the 12% in HDR's presentation. The primary driver is 2.4% for purchase power costs. So that's $782,000. We have a new one, the rate reserve replenishment, proposed to be spread over 5 years. In part, instead of recovering that over 3 years, we extended that to 5. Because we knew that we were going to be proposing the purchase power cost adjustment clause in the rate schedules, so that gives us flexibility in recovering it over a longer period of time. This also includes crediting the CVPIA litigation settlement funds to the rate reserve account, and that would be part of the action items at the hearing next month, so if the board wants to go that direction, which we recommend. Labor cost increases, this is cost of living adjustments. This is the impact of cost of living adjustments in 2022 and 2023, which were slightly greater than what was in budget, and then as a compounding effect, and then estimates for 24 and 25, or here 24. Vendor cost inflation, I've talked a lot about that, and it is real. Fleet costs in particular, and repair and maintenance and fuel cost, we know those drivers. I've been through that in previous workshop. The strategic wildfire mitigation is $544,000 or 1.7%, and that's driven primarily by the increasing the budget amount to what we approved in annual procurements in 2023. So that approval in 2023 was greater than what was in budget and essentially is eating into operating reserves. By budgeting it, we're not eating into operating reserves. So that's an increase. Strategic personnel and vendors, I'm going to dive into these two line items a little bit deeper here in a second, amount to, what is that, 3.1%. And labor overheads inflation, that is driven primarily by medical going up 6.7%, the premiums increase. The net effective capital reserves is just under 1%, capital and reserves. We do have an offset called customer growth that helps mitigate these cost pressures and cost items. And then hundreds of small little things where we're looking at 3-year averages instead of just taking last year's budget times inflation and adjusting things that were too small for me to isolate and capture, but they all add up to a net reduction of $103,000 or, a negative 0.3%. So I'm going to dive into just a few of these. I promise not every single one, and then we can come back to it and ask further questions if we need to. I do want to touch on this chart because I love it. This is average billed KWH per account per month, and you'll see that on the left, I went over this last workshop, the red dots are this year, and in the winter we were experiencing average KWHs well above the historical past. That's due to the record cold winter. We had a cold winter, we had a wet winter, and it was cold, so it was dry snow, it was not slop, and it was great skiing, and they used a lot of KWH to heat their homes and power things. Then as soon as that stopped, our electricity usage per account went down. And it's all 4 months, it is less than the previous years. And I don't know exactly why, but it is real. It's a measurable activity. And so these last 4 months have been below the previous 3 years as far as an average per account of KWH billed. And I looked into it, and it's definitely more so. These are total figures. I also looked at specifically at residential just for 23 versus 2022, and primary was down, I want to say about 5% to 2022 and for these 4 months, and then secondary was flat. So from a residential perspective, it was driven by the primary residence. Just in comparison to last year, I didn't have time to go back every single year. But for these 4 months, it was, so residential was down about 3% combined.
Yeah.
Summer was nice and mild.
One speculation is that in previous periods, there was less vacationing elsewhere, and perhaps there was some vacations this summer that left the home vacant because after the pandemic. I don't know. It's just one speculation. Could be weather. Stephen Keats and I are working on some very exciting weather correlation analysis, and we look forward to sharing that with everyone to isolate weather and temperature variations. Looking back over, I think we got 5 years of data and weather information. Making good progress on that project. Energy purchases for 2024, 174 megawatt hour, 174,000 megawatt hours. I went over this we went over purchase power in detail last workshop, so I'm not going to dive into these. This was the detail. Again, this was an attachment as well of our purchase power. cost components there. The rate reserve, in workshop one, we were going to cover it over 3 years, which was a 1.9% impact, and we've reduced that to over 5 years for a 1.1% rate impact. And then cap and trade, I looked at those funds, and that decrease for 2024 last budget cycle was $200,000 for 2024. But I think I'm very comfortable based on the cash balance that we can only reduce it by $50,000, which helps with the rate impact as well, because that's an offset to purchase power cost. So now I'm going to dive into the strategic cost drivers, those two bullets that added up to 3.1%. They were grouped between personnel, specific, labor cost items, and then vendor AP items. This first page is personnel, and again, this is electric, utility, specific amounts. And the first two items are full-time equivalent or position ads for a management analyst and a network system administrator. I do have some additional slides on personnel, but these are the electric side portion of those costs. Two IT position reclassifications, reduction in IT contract services. I grouped that in personnel because it relates to the network system administrator position ad, so I left that one in there as an offset to the personnel costs, even though that's actually a vendor item. 133,000 is a shift to operations from CapEx. So that's, the head count's the same, it's just basically journeyman linemen are charging more of their time to operations cost in this budget than to capital projects budget. And so that impacts the P&L, the annual operating expense side of the electric utility. 51,000 is the electrician position, Q1, that was anticipated to become vacant due to attrition in 2024. And now that's expected to become vacant after Q1. We do have a standby hours increase that is a measurable increase, 123,000. That's to increase, we've noticed an increase in standby hours to increase our ability to respond to reliability and resilience of the power system in the event of storms and things of that nature. And so that's that increase. And so the budget in previous years was light, and so we're trying to get it closer to reality for the needs of standby hours. And then changing an apprentice in budget, the two positions that were apprentice are now budgeted as linemen. It's not to say they're going to be a journeyman lineman. They could be an apprentice and then upgrade, but it gives us more flexibility in recruiting and retention to have that in the budget as opposed to not having it in budget and being a budget bust. That was not Joe's last words, but it was in the last 30 days. That was definitely one we talked about. Moving on to strategic cost drivers for electric from a vendor's perspective, I am not going to read all of these. This was in the staff report, is consistent with the previous workshop, and this is just a reminder of what all of these items are. I'm happy to talk about one of these if the director wanted me to. I put them in absolute value order, the suggestion of someone. Someone in this room. So that's the electric utility. Moving on to the water utility, revenues are up 7.6%. The rate increase is 8%, so that's just a shift in details of revenues, because this is all revenues. This doesn't include, or the 8% that is the approved rate increase for 2024 already is just the rate component, but in revenues, there's other revenues. There's miscellaneous revenues. late charges, standby fees, rents. There's some various rents on the water side. And so the net adjustment fine tuning for this year is a 7.6% revenue increase. Costs are up 12% B2B. Significantly more debt service for the water utility, primarily from previous COPs, but there's also new COPs. This is still less debt than what you had 3 or 4 years ago. Just a reminder. Less debt service. We also have an offset for facility fee usage from the 2006 COPs. It's $359,000. So since that issuance, we issued more debt back in 2006 in part due to facility fee related projects. And so a portion of that debt is paid for by facility fees. And we have a Donner Lake surcharge that continues through 2032, I believe. It also helps pay for that debt service. This is 24 and 2025, relatively consistent with the 7% approved rate increase for 2025, the increase from 24 to 25, plus we have a little bit of customer growth that's factored in there. I did fail to mention, I'm just jumping back a page, in the current budget, there was $22,000 in investment income budgeted for the operating fund. That's not a lot, and that's because interest rates were barely measurable in return, right? With LAIF and PCIA, Placer County, and et cetera. That is now $245,000. So we're back to closer to normal interest in investment income. It's obviously super conservative stuff. So similar chart here for water utility that adds to about 8%. Some of these percentages, these are rate impacts. These are the components of the rate impact. You have water costs going up $186,000. That's in part to electric utilities' 12% rate increase, right? There's also some generator cost in there, I believe. There is maintenance of generator, I should say. The personnel impact I talked about for electric, this is water side. Inflation, same thing. The strategic items I'll talk to in a minute, separate slide. Labor overhead inflation is the medical premiums increase. We have customer growth, and all other was $42,000 for water. Strategic cost drivers for incremental cost drivers for personnel are the water portion of the 2 FTE ads, the water portion of IT reclassifications, and a $34,000 reduction in IT contract services related to that network system administrator, totaling netting to $113,000 or 0.6%. On the AP side, a new meter maintenance program, regulatory driven is $70,000. Generator maintenance service contract, that's for all water. We have over 20. I can't, remember how many, Chad? Yeah, it's at least 20 generators that they need to work when we need them. And so they need to have not only maintenance when they break, but there's a thing called preventative maintenance, PM. So there's PM services as well in that. We did have an initiative due to our strategic plan update. We shifted one of our initiatives more water-centric, and so we shifted $40,000 of the strategic initiatives line item and budget to water. So that's $40,000. Other than that, these are the same items as talked in depth at the last workshop. Capital assets, before we look at the expenditures, I just want to give some perspective on some metrics. The gross fixed assets are almost, so that's before depreciation. are $100 million for electric and $137 million for water. So one way to say what's the size of the utility is gross fixed assets, and $100 million in electric, more in water. These are utilities are capital-intensive businesses. You know that. The net capital assets, which is gross fixed assets less accumulated depreciation, and CWIP, construction, there's another one. Construction work in progress. So particularly on the water side at year end, we may be 90% done with the Pioneer pump station or the Pioneer pipeline, but maybe we don't close it out at year end, so it stays in CWIP until January. And so we don't start depreciating it until January because we haven't quite finished closing out the punch list, so to speak. So that's the kind of stuff that's in CWIP at year end with every company. So for electric is 61 million and water 76 million. One of Fitch's, one of the rating agencies, I think they all use it, Fitch had some good guidance on it. They do a plant remaining useful life calculation. It's not exact, but it's an estimate. And that calculation is 19.2 years for electric and 16.7 for water. It speaks to why there's currently an aggressive water construction improvement plan that we have. And we're executing on. And this number I'm anticipating to grow closer to the 19 that's over on the electric side by the time we close out 2023 due to the expansive amount of capital we're spending in 2023 to reinvest in our infrastructure. And then interesting metric here is net capital assets per account, just to give you a perspective of this net capital assets here in the center of the page per account. So our investment is $4,200 on electric and $5,600 per account in water for our system. So I thought that was interesting. The sum of 10 years capital improvement plans for electric and water are 106 and 89 million respectively. And I went through the details of this last workshop. There is in 2024 and 5, there is, what is that, 5 million for Martis Valley substation rebuild. There is $3 million in 24 and 25 combined for a battery storage project. There's also a fair amount of capital investment. As you know, our capital reserves are up close to 13 million currently because of delays in the roadblocks of remodeling this building, and then also the developing a new building somewhere, either the courtyard or completely. Now there's a new town master plan that calls for us moving facilities completely. So starting that process is going to be starting to spend some money that's been built up. So again, this is a plan. It's not exact, but it is. We have to have a plan somewhere. Capital expenditures for water are a little a lot lighter than 2023. It's a planning year. There's still 4.4 million in water-specific projects, and then it jumps back up to 6 million, which is a healthy figure, reinvesting in water capital projects. Personnel, the staff report included an attachment with a full-blown organization chart. You can't really read this, but it is in there. Essentially it's 2 + 2 FTEs for 2024 and no additional for 2025. And we do have the quarter of a position for the electrician, and then the 2 FTE ads, one for a IT network administrator, system administrator, and management analyst position. And the plan, I believe, is the last few budget cycles has been, approving the budget resources for these positions is different than a full-blown justification, which has been included in the salary schedules, the wage schedules that get approved by the board each year. Once we know the CPI figure and have done the negotiations, so to speak, that comes forthcoming, planned hopefully in December. It does happen sometimes in January. But I'm going to pause there in case there's any further questions. I know that had some questions on that last workshop.
So the justifications are going to be incorporated in December of 2023? Is that what?
As part of the wage schedules that are presented to the board for approval, that it would include justifications for those positions, because those positions would be added in their appropriate grades. Does that make sense?
Kind of not. So you're asking us to approve the budget, but then we also will be approving those job descriptions or those wage schedules and the justifications in December, is that correct?
So what we'll do is, and we can answer any questions on personnel and staffing changes this evening as well. For the purposes of budgeting, we're putting a budgetary number based on our assumptions on where a position or title will fall in our salary schedule. And once the budget's approved, we'll come back to the board for salary schedule adjustments, whatever those are, for the following year, and they'll also include those positions in those salary schedules. So it's kind of a, chicken or the egg type thing. Right now, we're asking for authorization for a budgetary placeholder for these positions. For example, the IT network administrator position is something we're proposing to add in response to the increase in workload and demand on our current IT administrator and the future work we have. And so programs, as we continue to evolve technologically and staff has more computers and more endpoints and more IT engagement, there's been a growing workload demand. We still have one network administrator, the same we had back in 5, 6, 7 years ago, when there was far less demand on that department. And so we can happy to have those discussions on it. Right now, for budget purposes, we're looking for a placeholder, and then we'll come back with the actual salary schedule for 2024. So the admin management analyst position is in large part is a budgetary placeholder to recruit someone that can assist the district in some of our regulatory compliance needs that we need for both water and power. We've just discussed earlier this evening a couple of variable rate programs, pilot programs that would require a lot of analytics and kind of management analyst roles to put those together. We'd also look at things like adding grant applications, grant management to those types of personnel positions as well. And so what we're looking for as a district to start putting in place admin management analyst positions that have a selection of skill sets to help us at the management level do analytics for some of the new programs we're putting in place.
I apologize. I missed the last meeting, so I didn't benefit from hearing the budget, all the budget stuff. I know at one point you guys were talking about adjusting a position from a union level up to a higher level. Is that correct?
We're not adjusting a position. We are vacating a current union position, a meter reader. We don't have that skill set is no longer needed in our at our personnel level. So we've completely automated our meter reading with the AMI system. We have our electricians that do the technical component, repairs of meters, installation of meters, but the meter reading position, in large part in this industry, has sunsetted. What we've asked to add is a vegetation management position to handle the, as we talked about in the community circles and some of the other, the wildfire mitigation plan presentation, we've increased the amount of investment into our vegetation management to be in compliance with GO 95 and some of the emerging regulations that are coming. So that position would be managing contractors, tracking programs, collecting data, and kind of forecasting the workload in the future.
And this is a year-round position.
Yes.
What would they mainly be doing in the wintertime?
Well, we have a lot of vegetation management in the winter with tree falling, branches falling, so still coordinating contractors real time, but also developing those plans year over year. So it's not just something that, you kind of, just like all of our operations, you plan in the winter and execute in the summer. And so it'd be very similar for this position as well.
And with the education and experience levels, how would that be? I don't know if I'm getting too far into the weeds here. I mean, so bringing it up to a management level, I would expect that the education and experience and certifications, there's a certain level in order to be minimal qualifications, meet the minimal qualifications for that management position.
We're going to hire a position that meets the workload needs of the district. For this evening, we're looking for a budgetary approval to address the regulatory requirements of vegetation management. And so obviously we'll have to survey the landscape of what those positions look like, what the qualifications are, and what the recruiting market looks like.
Who's been doing all this work in the meantime?
It's been I think I heard the phrase earlier, it takes a village. It's been operations managers, it's been assistant operations managers, it's been the union staff, it's been contractors, it's been a collective effort.
So you're basically gonna just bring it all into one person who's gonna be managing the whole thing. And who would this person be reporting to?
I'd have to look at the org chart. That could change between now and
Okay,
January.
okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I was on this slide, and the next slide had that electric wildfire defensible space position listed, as well as two range reclassification items. Overheads, labor overheads. I went over this last workshop. The five main components of labor overhead are pension, the medical, dental, non-productive payroll, and payroll hours, FICA, Medicare, and workers' comp insurance. I touched on the medical, dental going up 6.7%. We do, in overheads, is a $35,000 for a proposed wellness benefit program. Has a $14,000 impact in overheads for electric and $12,000 for water. Many companies have this type of program. We do not, so it's being proposed. Obviously, we'd come back to the board with a full presentation for implementation. Transportation overhead is up significantly, and that's driven by the inflation costs of repairs and maintenance and fuel costs and insurance and depreciation. This is debt service for electric and water. As you know, as part of the budget process, we do a financial master plan, 10-year plan. It's similar to what HDR had in their model. I don't know if it evolved over time from one of those, but anyway, we have our own internal model. It's not fully in sync with his information, but For example, he mentioned 3% inflation, and in the current draft of financial master plan, I have a 3.5% factor for years 3 through 10. Customer growth is 1.0% for electric, 0.8 for water. These are based on historical averages. The current growth rate for electric this year is 0.5, and for water, 0.6. So there's been a slowdown in account growth last 12 months. We talked about the rate changes. These are just showing differences in the financial master plan. And this essentially is very similar to the reserve schedules and the dip that HDR, Sean was presenting. It's just our balances, and the highlights in yellow are the rate reserve. We're recovering that back, that depletion or the utilization in 2023. We're recovering it, recovering it over 5 years, so we don't get back until 2028 to 50% of purchase power cost. Capital reserve goal dips in the early years. This is for electric. And then it does build up in the out years, but the out years do not include what we should anticipate potentially happen through the electric system master plan, which is a project for 2024. There's an electric system master plan in the budget, and that is likely to produce some needs for capital improvement that aren't factored currently in the 10-year system master plan, much like when we did the water system plan analysis, Far West, I think, that helped us develop the 10-year capital improvement plan for water. So water, we use some reserves in the near term. And for water, you know, in 2025, we'll be doing a full rate study, rate COSA for water, because we had 5 years of water rates approved. 2025 is the last year of that. And so in 2025, we'll be doing another COSA for water. It'll kind of reset everything. Speaking of COSA, you guys know about all this stuff. We just went over it. I do have a few more tidbits of information. This was from the Wall Street Journal back in January. The USA city average electric price was up 14% and up 22% from 2021. There's that 10.6 again. I don't think Sean had showed this graph. This is how, this is a CMUA analysis of average residential bills done back in May of 2023. The arrow is pointing to the district's electricity average residential bill, and on the far right is San Diego Gas and Electric, PG&E, and Southern Cal Edison IOUs, in red, black, and orange. I would never say, rarely say 100%, but I would, with 90+% confidence level, know that there are, in all of these, including the ones on the far right, there are more rate increases to come of double digits. We are not the only utility dealing with these issues. And speaking of that, 41% plus increase the September bill for utilities, Liberty Utilities locally here in Truckee. There are some customers on Liberty that are not in our service territory. They're at $27.38 on a September bill. This was a 525 kilowatt hour bill, and a similar bill for TDPUD is 30%, 29% less currently. This is Plumas Sierra's information. We're currently 27%, or Plumas is currently 27% over the PUD, not including the WPCA, which is their PCA that we're talking about. They have a WPCA, wholesale power cost adjustment, I believe is what it stands for. And it's not jumping out at me. Yeah, right at the very top there. Wholesale power cost adjustment. So their current adjustment is 3 cents. It looks like they're changing it, they're looking at it monthly. And I'm not leaning that direction for us, I can tell you that. So they had, let's see, where did I just go? In January, it was 2 cents, and then in moving forward in February or March, I believe it went to 4 cents, and then in July, they changed it to 3 cents adder on per kWh. So I would not lean that direction personally, but obviously we'll talk about it as a team and more with Sean and come back with a recommendation to the board. But their current, including their 3 cent charge, their current rates are 43% greater than our current rates. Showed this chart previously. And our recommendation tonight on this item, there is no direct fiscal impact. Is for the workshop is to receive this information. Workshop information provides strategic direction to the staff regarding budget 24 and 25 preparations. The next up is the public hearing on the 1st. So, I went through the entire budget for 2 years for the district in less than an hour. I hit the tips of the waves. I definitely tried to drive home a couple of key messages, particularly related to inflation and other areas for electricity cost. I detailed the strategic drivers, things that help us move the needle for our mission, for our resiliency, and for our goals and objectives for the district. And it takes resources and it takes dollars. And I tried to quantify that and group that in a way that's at least understandable and meaningful to a lot of information. That's what I have. Turn it back to you, President Bender.
All right, thank you, Mike. Do we have any public comment on this workshop budget item? No public comment.
No public comment.
All right. How about some directors?
I'm just gonna say, Mike, thank you so much for all of trying to simplify it and paint the picture similar to what Sean did for us earlier, painting the picture and trying to help us understand this super complicated budget that we have here. So I appreciate it, and you did a fabulous job with that. Thank you.
No, nothing further. I
Budgeted out.
echo Kim's comment.
Well,
Appreciate that. I do want to make a comment that I do like your informational tidbits to kind of, understand that we're not alone in this world of financial sort of craziness, and sort of trying to get into the analytics of, where things are headed in this region, state, this country in general. So I do appreciate you sort of finding these little tidbits for us to see where we are in relation to other areas of the world, of the country, or whatever.
Nice.
hey, well, you must work like Sean night and day to compile all that information.
Takes
It's
some time.
amazing. Huh?
It does take some time.
The last report on the budget was when was that? 2 months, 3 months?
Well, we had a workshop last month.
Oh, last month, okay.
Yep.
So you got all this in 1 month? Wow.
Well, it's been a 6-month process
Well,
and
thank
a
you,
collaborative
Michael.
effort. I mean, I did all the talking, most of the talking tonight, but the entire team and others that aren't here tonight certainly helped with many of the details. So appreciate everyone's support and help
I was
in
gonna say, there's
getting
a
through
lot
the
of
weeds
detail.
of this information.
Like, we can't provide much more details because I wouldn't know of any. That's what the sign says there.
Yep. Agreed. It was you do a very good job of distilling down the multitudes of numbers, reflecting, what we spend our money on, looking forward to what we're investing in and we're expecting to invest in, and keeping track of all those streams is your job, and thank you for doing it. I appreciate it. And I do like I agree, your graphs, your graphics, your tidbits of ancillary information it does really help in the big picture, and it makes it a little kind of fun. And I like your zooming in and your zooming out in particular.
Yeah.
It's really,
It tells me where we are in the presentation, so that I don't have any
I enjoy that.
end of presentation anxiety,
Well,
Yeah.
I will tell you a funny one is, I do have about 55 backup slides
Right.
that I'm happy that I did not even show. This kind of freaked out general manager, right? He's like- But they're there if we want to, dive into them.
I'm satisfied.
I thank you, everyone. I think we've got a budget for the next 2 years with all the hard work, and in November, we'll get to approve it. So,
Exciting.
yeah, big lift.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Well, All right, that is workshop number 8, and we've got closed session, item number 9, pursuant to Government Code Section 54957, Public General Manager's Performance Plan Review. So we'll now go into closed session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.